Hey guys, and welcome to our June live stream. This month we're a little late to the game, but we wouldn't be right if we didn't pay our respects. So this month we are talking about the great, the king of schlock, the king of the drive-in, whatever you want to call him, the master of movies in general, based on his career alone, Roger Corman.
A true titan of cult film who not only contributed a lot to the movies he made, the movies he directed, he produced, but he also helped a lot of people get into the industry and helped a lot of people get their start, such as James Cameron and Joe Dante. He helped along the way. Uh, his influence is felt to this day, and his influence will be felt for a long time to come. He is a guy who I don't think gets nearly enough credit for all he has done in movies. And today, we aim to give him his due on some of the things he contributed. More specifically, some of the movies he's directed and produced, of which there are a lot of them.
I want to say there was like 400 and something if you put them together, like total credit. So
It's a staggering amount.
we're covering 6. So trust me, there's plenty to go through. So we kind of cherry picked some from all different aspects, both his directing stuff and producing stuff through different decades. So we're gonna cover a little Roger Corman charcuterie board for you tonight. But first of all, I guess I should say welcome. This is our Twitch live stream. We do this once a month here, and then you can watch the playback on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/the Movie-Club Emporium. I've been putting those up. I usually try to get them up like a week or two after. Sometimes it's late at night, and I'm just like, you know what? I'll just put up 3 live streams at the same time because I forgot to put them up categorically. But you can check those out there. We also have weekly reviews that go up for newer and movie not all necessarily all new movies, but just movies in general. This last video I put up, I believe, was what was it? Oh, Monkey Man, the new Dev Patel movie. And then this Sunday, they go up every Sunday, I guess I should say that, when you can watch them. You know, you'll know when to watch them if you click the like button and the subscribe, and I'm YouTubing it now, and the little notify bell. That way you'll know when they go up. Usually on Sundays at 4 p.m. This week, we were talking a little bit in the green room. I had originally was gonna go watch Horizon, but talked myself out of a 3-hour Western. So instead, this week's review was going to be over the new kind of indie darling, I Saw the TV Glow. I finally got to check out. But we're not here to talk about all that just now. We can get to some of that stuff later with the chat when they all start popping in. I guess first and foremost, I should say, Nick, how are you?
I'm all right. It's a long day at work, making sure the airplane brakes we make will function so people don't die in a fiery plane crash. So, all good to go. Yeah, no high stakes there or anything. No, I'm doing all right. I'm living my life up here in the great Northwest, enjoying an uncommonly mild summer. Sorry to rub it in, Jason, because I know Oklahoma's a sweltering hellhole right now.
You know, I
Every time,
wasn't gonna bring it up, but the fact that you're just like it's like Burr in the summer in Washington. Meanwhile, I almost passed out walking from the house to the car to go to work at 7:40 in the morning is ridiculous.
I missed many things about Oklahoma: the barbecue, the people, but not the weather. Never the weather or the bugs. Ugh. Yes. Anyway, so no, things are going pretty well in my life. I've been just enjoying, a little more quiet in my life the last few months. I am getting to theater about every weekend. I went to go see Inside Out 2 in 3D, and I did not have my kid with me. It's just my wife and I because we are children. Gotta say, very impressive in 3D. It really popped, and it didn't seem overly gimmicky. So And this weekend, I'm planning to go see A Quiet Place Day One, which is one of my most anticipated movies of the year. Otherwise, I've gone to see. I'm trying to think of what all I've seen. I've seen The Fall Guy. I've seen In a Violent Nature, which I do recommend. We're getting some really solid movies this year. I've been very impressed by what I've seen in the movie theater. I'm going to have to get around to watching some of the movies that aren't as well regarded. So I have something to bash when we do our best and worst of, and at the beginning of next year. So although there's a new one coming out that looks to be a super hipster movie. I call it the genre of OMG. That's so random. The movie called Kinds of Kindness, which has Meth Damon and I'm
Oh,
drawing a blank as to who else is in that movie. Yes,
uh,
Jesse Plemons, aka Meth Damon,
yeah, it's got
and
Emma Stone. It's a New Yorgos.
Barry Walls.
The guy who made Poor Things and The Lobster, and I think this one was supposed to be less Poor Things and more like his old stuff, Killing of a Sacred Deer and like Dogtooth. So it's supposed to be like kind of they're I think the trailers are selling it as more like remember Poor Things, and I think from what I've heard, people are like it's more like pretty dark than his last couple movies.
Well, like watching any trailer for it, I dare you to go watch any trailer for it and decipher what remotely it's about. It's random people doing random things, and yeah, it looks like an incredibly annoying movie. They probably are annoyed at me because every time I get an advertisement to it, I say something snarky on their page. But yeah, I so that'll be one since I have the Regal Movie Pass. I go watch just to go hate on it. Since hey, when you pay $21 a month to go see unlimited movies, you can go see whatever stupid thing you want, and I've taken advantage of that.
Yeah, I am. I like I said, I talked myself out of Horizon. We did go last weekend to watch Right Here Right Now, the Ghost concert, which surprisingly had a big crowd for a 3 p.m. showing on a Saturday at Quail Springs Mall. A lot of Ghost fans in Oklahoma. Maybe it's because we don't have the Bible in our classrooms just yet. But sorry. Uh, next week I know is Maxine, which is my most anticipated movie of the year. And then the week after is Longlegs, which I'm hearing is supposed to be just absolutely insane. So I plan on covering both of those, so it should be a pretty good summer, hopefully. And Twisters
I'm thinking
because it's a rite of passage. I live in Oklahoma. You have to go watch Twisters.
yes. Oh man, no twist. I remember years ago there being talks of a Twister sequel, like in the late '90s, early 2000s. Never would have thought. Here we are, what 28 years later, or something like that, or 20 some odd. It's been a while, and we're getting another Twister movie. But hey, guess that's back in vogue again. I'm just waiting till one of these years we have a bunch of more killer asteroid movies that'll make the rounds because that's going to come back. If we just do like a retread of '90s disaster movies, I would not be shocked.
You know what? Not only would I not be shocked, I'd kind of be okay with it.
Yes, Dante's Peak too. The Read Dante's Peakening.
Yes.
Um, yeah, some fun fact, fun aside. I went to the town where Dante's Peak was filmed recently. Neat little place.
They have
Uh,
a little plaque for
and the-
that grandma who dies in the river.
what's that?
I said, do they have a little plaque there for the grandma that dies in the like slow cooks in the river?
I didn't get to that exact point, but I wouldn't be surprised if they did. We'll try to get any kind of fame you can, whatever your town's known for. Just like Yukon has a written on their water tower, the home of Garth Brooks. Wow, they've been advertising that for about 35 years now. But we could talk about the movies that are coming up and the movies of this year, but we're here to talk about some of the movies of yesteryear, some of them way far back.
Yeah.
Because this year we lost a titan of film, a man famous among cult film at the ripe old age of 98. He finally passed away, the late, great Roger Corman. A man who looks like your very sweet great uncle, yet made some of the trashiest movies you have ever seen in your life.
Yeah, like, especially if you see him. People ever watched a movie documentary where they talk to Corbin? He's very soft spoken, talks very articulate. And then you watch some of these movies, you're like, what in the world? Why is
I
Grandpa so nasty?
I was not quite ready for how hard some of these movies went. And I've seen some Roger Corman movies, but several of these was my first time watch. Um, and even the ones he didn't direct, he only produced. Watching a bunch of them in close succession, you can see the Corman influence on all of these movies and a lot of these movies. Uh, there's some themes that seem to develop, and I mean, the guy was he was all about the nudity, all about it, copious amounts of it. In one case, one of the movies we're talking about, hilarious amounts of it.
So let's start there, but let's start with like uh what was your intro to Corman? Because mine, I have two very interesting intros, but what was your intro to the films of Roger Corman? Do you know?
Trying to think here of he had his hand in so many movies. Um, some of his Edgar Allan Poe stuff of the '60s I was familiar with. I remember buying The Fall of the House of Usher on MGM's Midnight Movie Collections 20 some odd years ago. I'm looking through. He has such a vast filmography. I'm trying to think what it may have been his first. I'm looking for that. What was your introduction to Corman? How did
So,
you?
so my first introduction to Corman, I didn't know anything about Corman. I just knew that at my parents' house growing up in high school, I had this cool upstairs lofty room, but in like elementary school and middle school, I was downstairs in the very back room. Nick will remember. And there was I had a bunk bed and a Batman and Robin poster on my wall because Uma Thurman in that movie is smoking hot. And I had a little black and white television where I watched a lot of VHSs in black and white. Did never see them in color till years later. But my parents would go to bed on Saturday night. And I could stay up late and position my chair to where I could see if they moved in their room. I could watch the TV like really close. And so I would stay up and watch Monster Vision. Monster Vision and then CBS would play like edited versions of Tales from the Crypt. So in the 90s you saw like Death Race 2000, a lot of movies like that, but then it wasn't until my first like Corman movie to me was um actually you. It was the summer we spent counseling at this nightmare camp. Uh,
Oh man.
but for my birthday, Nick bought me a copy of Humanoids from the Deep, which we'll talk about later. But it was just like, oh, watching that movie was like really like is a hard crash course into the world of the Corbin. And then since then, again, seeing the big ones, Death Race 2000, Piranha, the stuff he produced or directed, Piranha, the big ones. Watching those as they came out on DVD, Blu-ray, streaming, whatever. And I'm really excited to kind of dig into these other ones as well.
I, w- One of the movie I caught early on TV. I was young. I was probably 11 or 12. Was a movie he produced from the '60s, which is rather a very shocking movie for its time. I think it came out in '68 called Targets,
Mhm.
and it opens up with this guy setting up all these weapons on top of a platform, and it just starts sniping people on the interstate. This guy who goes on this bloody shooting rampage. It is uncommonly violent and just blunt for a movie of that era, and it just kind of went for it. And I remember it was, especially for the era, a very shocking movie. And watching it on TV, it's kind of blew me away. He got a, I mean, he pushed the envelope and did as much as he could have. I was familiar with a lot of his kind of atomic era movies and whatnot, and some of the things like Attack of the Crab Monsters. The Wasp Woman was an early one I watched. There's others of his I was aware of, and I remember when I was 18 or 19, I managed to get a hold of a few more of his movies, like Death Race 2000, and in my opinion, one of the better Alien ripoffs, The Terror Within. There's a lot of movies you and I have seen over the
Mhm.
years that have had some sort of input by Corman. Um, And as I said earlier, you can really tell his influence in a lot of the things he worked. Even if he didn't direct it, he still had a lot of influence over what was going on in the movie and a lot of the design choices they made.
Yeah,
But
and he
I
okay.
yeah, it's his vast filmography and doing a lot of genre films, a lot of horror, a lot of action, a lot of violent crime films. Man, the crime movies he was involved with, man, they were a lot more harder edged than most of the things available at that time in the 60s and 70s. Um, I some of them, the dialogue, the sharp dialogue, and just the brutality of them would definitely make Quentin Tarantino proud. I'm sure. I'm sure he's quite a big fan of Corman, and I'm sure he was a big influence seeing some of his early work on some of the crime movies he did. But man, I'd say that he did a lot of schlocky movies. He made a lot of movies that were quite low budget, but man, he did a pretty amazing job with what he had to work with. I find that very impressive.
I think that's what makes him so relevant is because he did. We look at there's people in today where like Jason Blum, they or at least the way Blumhouse started was these low budget $1 million movies, get that money back, and I think that was Corman. Like Corman was the king of that because he had no money for these movies, but he knew what would sell to drive-ins and the teenagers, and so that was his bread and butter. It's kind of like and again another big one would be Charlie Band in the '80s. Like he knew what would sell to VHS on VHS. That's what he made. And Corbin was that way. He knew what would get butts, into a drive-in, and you that would make money enough money to cover what needed to be made next. And so it was definitely a kind of almost like this weird paycheck to paycheck movie business type, and yet he never even in the six that we really watched, even though they're over different decades, different genres, and yeah, you have the whole when we get into some of the later ones, like we are reusing sets, we're reusing this and reusing that, but nothing about Corman's movies, at least the ones that I know of and the ones that we kind of covered, never felt like just cheap trash. I mean, they're cheap trash. Let's not get it wrong; they are cheap trash. But he never came across as a schlock master to me. When you think of somebody, love him or hate him, like Lloyd Kaufman, when you think of Trauma, Corbin never gives off that vibe of just like making trash on purpose. He's wanting to do these genres. He's wanting to make the best he can with what he has. And if we could get a couple of boobies in it, sell a few extra tickets, even better. And so yeah, it's
Oh,
just it's so weird to see how amazing this model is and really only maybe one or two people kind of pick up that torch just a degree, but never. You'll never see another uh Corman, I don't think, in any entertainment business whatsoever.
I think he was able to succeed across various eras of film because of his work ethic and his creativity and his adaptability and willingness to do a lot of different genres and a willingness to just never ever stop working and do the best he could with what he had to work with. And it's just there's some like schlockmeisters like Fred Olen Ray, who made a lot of movies in the 80s and 90s, made a lot of super low budget movies. Most of them are pretty awful. I don't think he was an overly talented guy. He made fun B movies. Roger Corman could really take his material and elevate it. Uh, and you never got the feeling, and at least in any of his movies I've ever watched, that he was phoning it in when he was putting together a movie. He worked hard and tried to make something presentable. It may have been cheap, trashy, and full of boobs and blood, but he really tried to make it something worth watching even still.
Yeah. So we're gonna do the we like I said, we each picked three movies from different decades, different genres, different uh facets of his career. And so we're just kind of going to do these in chronological order to kind of take you through a timeline, a small minuscule piece of the timeline that is uh, the insane vastness of this man's work. And we're gonna start again, kind of where I think kind of where he started was the atomic era. Atomic, uh, atomic post World War II into the 50s. We're in the Cold War. The threat of the Cold War is on everybody, and so much like much like erotic thrillers in the 90s, the 50s were all about atomic apocalypse movies, and nobody really did them better than Corman,
It's
especially with this first one.
it was it was we've lived in, especially any of us who remember the 80s even a little bit, through the looming threat that there might be a nuclear war. But in the 50s and 60s, it was very much of, this is a very real possibility that the bombs will drop and everything will change. And we didn't have a good understanding yet of that technology and what all that entailed. So people's imaginations went wild of, what could happen when you have animals, people, environments exposed to large amounts of radiation. What would the aftermath be like? What would surviving be like? Would any kind of society hold together? There was a lot of these unknowns. So science fiction horror filmmakers went absolutely wild with the idea that any kind of creature exposed to radiation became gigantic and aggressive. People who were exposed to radiation became monstrous. It was it was one of the most commonly used plot devices of that era. And I love the atomic age of film in the 50s and early 60s because we got so many fun movies and a shocking amount of really well done ones. So Corman, this is actually isn't his first movie. I believe his first movie was a Western from 1954. But I thought this one, starting off of it, this is one of my picks from 1955, would be a good jumping off point because it's the kind of imaginative B movie that Corman would be known for. Uh, and it shows a lot of interest for him and his characters and fleshing them out and making the best with what he had, which in this case, what he had was basically a house and the area around it and a monster costume he made and a group of people and apparently a fog machine. That is really what he had to work with in this movie. Do you mind if I give a quick synopsis?
Absolutely, go for it.
So it's the mid 50s, and out in a remote area of the United States, there's a man and his daughter. He has prepared for the coming nuclear war, and so he's packed up supplies in his remote house. And his house is situated in this valley that is somewhat shielded from the atomic fallout, and it has a little different weather patterns. So it's a little more of a safe area from the horrors of the atomic war. And it's this guy, and his guy's, I'd say, 50s or so, and his daughter looks to be in her 20s. But as you can imagine, they don't stay alone for long, as you have several interesting characters wander into this enclave and take refuge here, much to the father's dismay. He's trying to take care of his daughter and himself, and he doesn't know these people that he's bringing in. And you have an array of, the handsome good guy, the old prospector and his donkey Diablo, a guy who's kind of a raging jerk, and his stripper girlfriend, uh, and a man who's already been exposed to a large dose of radiation, and there appears to be something happening to him. So the movie takes place, a lot of it just takes place in and around this house as they adapt to the new normal of trying to survive, of worrying about if the fallout's going to start affecting them, and the ever looming worry of dissension within, and the fact that there's something wandering around outside and that's watching them, and they're not quite sure what it is. But the old man who put this whole outfit together and put this stronghold together, he's he knows more than he's saying initially. So that's, without giving much away, that's the basic synopsis. 7 characters in this home with death all around them and something mysterious looming.
Yeah, so I wrote it down because I wanted to address this. Is you the opening of this movie from the very beginning, from the movie, way this movie starts, you're just it's gonna be something different than like okay, so it's the end of the world movie. Okay, well it's all black and white. It's got Richard Denning from Creature from the Black Lagoon. Let's turn this on. And you expect like the big credit. Here's the name of the movie, and then we're off to the race. But instead, you get this like huge music boom, and you get this quote: "What you are about to see may never happen, but to this anxious age in which we live, it presents a fearsome warning. Our story begins with the end." And then the movie starts, and I gotta tell you, I had not really seen this movie before. Like I'd maybe seen bits and pieces, people talking about, like on clips from a documentary about maybe this either Corman or this age, this time of filming genre, I should say. Uh, what I was blown away with is more than anything is how this is kind of essentially the blueprint to Night of the Living Dead. I mean, we have a group of people. There's something outside lurking. We don't know what's going on. There begins a battle for who's in charge. I mean, not to a T, Night of the Living Dead, but I was shocked by how much this had to have influenced them for Night of the Living Dead.
That that honestly, that thought never occurred to me, but you are spot on. It definitely has a lot of similarities. And there's similarities to other, people, a group of strangers being confined to an area with unknown threats outside of something that used a lot in the following decades. Um, I don't. There were probably movies that did it before in terms of horror or sci-fi. Not many are. I can't really think of any off the top of my head. But this is such a dynamite formula and a great case of Corman. He didn't have a lot to work with, but he made the limitations work for him in this movie in the claustrophobic setting of, there's this home, there's immediate surroundings, but they can't leave. The idea that if they go beyond this little valley, that they will probably die horribly of radiation sickness, and the ever looming idea of how long can we survive here? There weren't enough supplies for this many people. We are facing an uncertain world. We're facing dissension on the inside, especially from one character in particular who they probably should have took out and shot early on in the movie because he is nothing but a terrible person, a threat, and they put up with way more than they should have. But again, you have these people, and they don't know what the future of mankind's going to look like. They don't know how many people are out there surviving because we don't really know the full extent of a nuclear war and what all it would do. And they play that uncertainty up here very well. Of we don't know what we need to survive, we need to go on, and we don't know what this is going to look like for us or future generations. And he played off that fear very well in this movie. And I'll say it's a pretty tense little movie.
It is. I mean, I was blown away by it. It does have some goofy stuff in it. I mean, I think I wrote down some of my notes just off the top of my head. I wrote down uh so we're just having the apocalypse at the pool because there's like the two women in this movie spend most of the time sunbathing in the or swimming in the pool. Um, there's the whole thing about like they were just standing around talking so much about the lack of food, things like that. And they're like, we just don't have enough food. There's not enough food, and then for the old man to be like, all right, I guess we gotta make babies. Which one of you's knocking up my daughter? Um, and then you do get, the creature is interesting. I wrote down what in the Masters of the Universe is this monster like it, but by the time you get to see it again, it's that classic like if it's goofy, hold back and not show it to the end. When you finally do see the monster, it's kind of earned its goofiness, and you're fine with it. But it is a goofy looking monster. But yeah, it is a lot of weird 50s. Like again, it's just like people like slamming doors, talking real fast. There is a moment, I won't say who it is, where you get to watch one of my favorite things in like these cheap movies is somebody throws a dummy off a cliff. There's just nothing better than watching a dummy fall off a cliff or off a building, whatever. Uh, that and then what actually turns out to be the undoing uh, of the creature. Speaking of directors, like setting up things. I mean, this is no Alien, but I definitely feel like Shyamalan drew a little bit of inspiration from this movie when you find out what it is that takes care of the monster at the end. Because this is kind of like the part of the. And you could watch documentaries about it, the whole every monster had to be killed by the end of the movie. There, you couldn't have a not have a happy ending. So it is this weird like, well, it's the end of the world, but doesn't mean you and I aren't gonna have a great time together. Roll those
Yes.
credits.
And you know, the weakness of the monster, it's like, yes, if being made of paper mache, I could definitely see why that's particularly the weakness. And I mean, I can't there's a lot of imagination that went into the creature. There's actually one part of the movie where they're referencing the effects of fallout on animals and people, and there's some drawings that he shows that I think are actually add more to the imagination than the creature itself. But it was 1955. They had they didn't have much budget to work with. Um, they did good holding off showing the monster as long as they could. Uh,
Yeah.
and I can excuse it. Yes, the monster looks incredibly cheesy, but some of the hints around the monster, some of the oh man, I think something's watching us, are pretty well done. By our standards today, the whole movie's really cheap and cheesy, but especially in the context of the time, I think it's a fun atomic age thriller. Uh, this is one I had heard about for a long time. I always really liked the premise of it.
Mhm.
And I was glad I finally got around to seeing it. This is one I'm really surprised no one ever did a remake of, because I think at various points they could have done a remake of it and made a very solid updated thriller on a higher budget with maybe a little more tech put into it. But oh well, I enjoyed it for what it is, and I think it's one that shows right off the bat Corman's got talent.
Absolutely. Uh, so I wanted to. Yeah, it does definitely has a monsters on Maple Street feel. Although there's one episode I think of more. I cannot remember for the life of me the name of it. There's one about um the old man and his wife have the bomb shelter in the basement, and like the neighbors are they all want to get in, and he's having a party, and the bomb goes off, and they all want to get in, and he like locks them all out, and so they all start kind of like begging and trying to buy their way into the his bomb shelter to the point to where they end up um in a frenzy, like ripping the door off. So like now they're all expected to die. Then it turns out to false alarm, but it does have that kind of feeling of like um
That episode
just
was called The Shelter.
yes.
The Shelter, great episode, and talk about something that did a really good job using some of the fear of atomic war of that era was the Twilight Zone. This does have a somewhat Twilight Zone feel to it. Not as much in any kind of crazy twist, although there is a twist in the movie that is never explicitly stated, but it is heavily hinted at.
Yeah.
So, as to the possible identity of a creature in the movie. So it said it never. It kind of leaves it up to interpretation, but I I actually thought that's a pretty clever little thing they threw in the story because I'm almost certain he knew what they was doing and it was all intentional.
Yeah. I like I said, for not having ever seen it, just seeing like clips from, whether it was, you know, I don't know if it was in the Nightmares in Red, White, and Blue. It may have been in the Corman doc itself. just little snippets of it. It was like, oh, because his one of his first movies was this one. Probably known more, I think, for the title than the actual movie. I was blown away by how fun and good it was.
Yeah. And I mean, just on a micro budget. And I could understand why they had those ladies hanging out by the pool. Very attractive 50s blonde bombshell women. And I actually think there's some pretty solid acting in this segment too, as well. I just said lot with the money, lot of, lot of accomplished for the money. And we showed early on, Corman's got it.
Yeah.
But in the
So,
'60s, we got to see more. Anyway, segue. Go ahead.
well, I was gonna say, we jump ahead 4 years to speaking of if if the day the world ended kind of quietly influenced um uh movies like Not Living Dead. The next movie we're gonna talk about, and like I can't tell you how many movies or episodes of anthology horror TV shows have covered this same topic. But we jump 4 years to 1959 with a great title uh for a weird little um horror beatnik movie, A Bucket of Blood.
Oh man, talking about you want to talk about one of those one of non-copyrighted movies that showed up in so many collections back in the day, showing up on DVD, and I remember this like being thrown in with so many movie collections because it was no copyright on it, so people could slap it on whatever they wanted, whatever collection, and sell it. And it's got a provocative title, so and which is exactly the point. I mean, in 1959, a movie called A Bucket of Blood, that's going to put some butts in the seats.
Yeah.
And it did. It was a pretty successful movie of the era, and one that's, especially out of its early stuff, has had a pretty lasting impression on people because of it's a really interesting snippet of the beatnik culture of that time, and kind of vapid artists in general. Uh, yeah, you want to take this
Yeah.
one?
Yeah. So we start off with uh if there's one man who quite possibly could have been in every single Roger Corman movie, it was probably in half of them. It's the great Dick Miller, who is really young. He looks like a spry 59 years old in this movie. He has to be like in like his 20s. um, he's one of those guys that he's just looked like your grandpa forever. Him and John Carpenter and a couple of others. They've just always been. They're just all grandpa face. Um, he works at this like beatnik club uh as a waiter, um and he likes the pretty girl. He is into the art scene, but they all just kind of treat him like a local yokel. uh, me, Meanwhile, there's this weird undercover cop scene going on uh with I gotta say the first thing that jumped out at me in this movie is the cardigan sweater this undercover cop is wearing. Because if you followed us long enough, you know I'm a huge fan of a good cardigan sweater, and this is a sweater to beat the band. Um, but mean so he there's undercover drug sting because they're beatniks. We get the Orson Welles of beatnik poetry, just like giving giving it us all. But they all make fun of him, and so he goes home in a fit of rage, kills the landlady's cat, and to cover it up, turns it into a sculpture. And then it's every kind of story you've seen before. It's been episodes of Tales from the Crypt. It's been episodes of uh Hitchhiker. Um, even that weird like art Jake Gyllenhaal movie on Netflix kind of. He begins having to kill to make his art. And kind of becomes the talk of this group. Meanwhile, people from this club are dropping left and right. And it has a very, I'll put it this way, it has a very reminiscent ending, especially if you've seen either version of the William Lustig classic Maniac. It has a very Maniac like ending.
It
But
does.
it's just surrounded by all these weird beatnik characters. There are these two sailors that are like high on heroin the whole movie. Um, you have like all these artsy fartsy weird things going on, and then again, it's just Dick Miller, who's almost borderline playing like a uh Lenny s character. At least
Yeah.
they treat him that way. Um, and then there's just some wild art that happens in this movie.
Well, if you want to say it, so I will. A lot of the characters in this movie are pretentious douchebags. The Orson Welles guy, wow, it's just it's all these people standing around the most pretentious cafe where they're it's like I can't remember what any of the like dishes are specifically, like the papaya cheesecake and all these. It's like something we make fun of for ridiculous vegan food, only it's ridiculous hipster food from 1959.
It's
And
you
it's
know what
just
it
all
is?
these people
It's the joke
standing around
from oh, sorry.
standing
Uh,
around standing around talking about how deep all their art is, and a bunch of vapid people being vapid and trying to sophisticate each other, which is it's funny. It's like I'm sure in the beatnik culture there was tremendous art and poetry that came out of it, but there's a lot of people that are just hanging out trying to seem cool, and this movie is making fun of this crowd a lot, and it's
that's
pretty great.
that's what I was gonna say. Like this is making fun of it then as much, if not more so, than something like "So I Married an Axe Murderer" is making fun of like the resurgence of that in coffee shops in the '90s. Where it's just like there's so like the amount of just heads up their own butt is palpable in this movie. With all these characters, like there's the bar owner who's such a dickhead.
Wearing his beret. Oh, there there's berets abound in this movie. At one point, Dick Miller makes it big with his sculpture of covering a cat up with plaster, and it's like all his art. That's it. I'm gonna kill it, then I'm gonna cover it with plaster, including the murder weapon. And people go nuts about this. People are wanting to throw tons of money at him, and he becomes the toast of the town. And as soon as he sells his first sculpture, he goes out, buys a beret, and buys one of those long cigarette holders and whatnot, and comes in looking absolutely absurd, and it's hilarious. Yeah, Dick Miller hams it up in this movie. He plays this buffoon who just wants to be accepted as an artist. He plays it so well. We're used to seeing Dick Miller in a lot of things, and a lot of smaller supporting roles. But it was interesting to see him take center stage as the main character in a movie. And I think he was pitch perfect in this role.
Oh yeah, he's fantastic. And what like I said, not this is the pre Herschel Gordon Lewis era, so you're not seeing a bunch of like sheep innards and stuff. But I will say when how his escalation of his sculptures, um, especially the one of the man, is quite like it's pretty harrowing stuff, especially in like the
It
crisp
is.
black. Now, did you watch this on Prime? Because mine was in color.
No, I watched a black and white version on YouTube.
Okay. Yeah, on Prime it was the colored version, which is kind of a little more frightening because it's that like weird, gross, like TNT, like weird, like when you see old colored photographs, it's just very off putting.
Yes. I I didn't. I just watched the one I first came across, but yeah, I find a lot of those old colorized movies. It's just, I mean, the colors really pop, but it looks so unnatural that in most of them it doesn't work. I can appreciate a good black and white movie, and yeah, I it's actually a pretty nicely shot movie too and photographed. Good to see Dick Miller's sad little apartment where he does the deed and uh spend a lot of time in this cafe. Another one, kind of like The Day the World Ended, very limited sets, but he made it work for him. And he ratcheted up the tension too. And it's just like sometimes you're like, okay, I don't know how this is going to play out. You know, what's going to happen when it's revealed what he's doing. And he just, you get to see him kind of mentally falling apart and doing crazier and crazier stuff and doing more and more extreme links just to be accepted as an artist, and just have people remember him as an artist. And yeah, I think it made some statements on art and culture at that time, and pretty sharp ones at that. If this had been made 10 years later, you would have seen a ton of blood in
Yeah.
this movie.
Well, I
He
was
was
gonna say,
limited at the time. You would have seen buckets of blood. You would have seen him chop people's heads off. But 59, he couldn't quite get away with that left, so so he had to just suggest it.
but still, when you see like the the one cop that comes in and he ends up getting, was it a shovel to the head or fire poker or whatever it is. Like even like I said, it was filmed in black and white, but this even the colorized version makes it so like it's not gory because it's the sculpture of, it's the victim covered in as a sculpture, but it's harrowing looking. Like it's like when it pops on screen and the music hits to show it, you're just like, oh my, like it's rough looking for, well, I think what anybody was expecting at the time, which again leads into Corman giving you that little extra oomph to make up for what he couldn't. And because it, like you said, the movie is basically the restaurant and then his apartment, which is probably essentially the same building.
Probably is.
Um, you're walking from one door to the other, but what isn't paid, what isn't shown on screen money wise, and like say the restaurant or the room, the sculptures look incredible.
They do. I guarantee, especially the one that's just the head. Um, I probably roped in some actual professionals to do them because, man, that'd be a cool movie artifact to own some of those sculptures. Although I did have one question about those. Did they not start stinking after a little while because they had rotting corpses in them? Or do just beatnik cafes smell that bad so it wasn't
It's
out of place?
it's all like, I mean, if I don't know much about being in culture, I'm assuming it's all the whole room smelled like clove cigarettes and like bad coffee, and we're all eating papaya cheesecake. That room probably smells like a rotting corpse.
Fair enough. So one thing I had to say, I was watching it and I thought to myself, that guy has the realest looking beard I've ever seen. Uh, uh the Orson Welles beatnik. I mean, that dude's beard. I was just like, wow. That's yeah. That's for those of you who don't know, that's a reference to Clerks the cartoon, a longtime favorite of Jason and I. But yeah, there's no, it's like he had a hilariously fake beard, and I loved it. I enjoyed this movie. I I thought it was a lot of fun getting to see Dick Miller like this. It was a very briskly paced movie too, because I think it's only just over an hour long.
Yeah, like
It
70
doesn't
minutes
waste any.
maybe.
Yeah, it doesn't waste any time, and man, I can appreciate that, especially in this era where we have people like Kevin Costner wanting to throw multiple 3-hour movies at us so he can show us how awesome he is. It's a nice to see a movie get to the point, build up some tension, tell a story, and get the hell out.
And if you're dying to see this in like a modern setting, you can't handle it. Uh, the episode of Tales from the Crypt, Ease'll Kill Ya. It's got a pre-Reservoir Dogs Tim Roth in it, playing a struggling artist who has to use blood in order to paint. Uh,
That is a great episode. I've not seen it since the 90s, but that one is hard hitting and it's got one of those endings that just punches you in the gut.
yeah,
It's a brilliant episode that is, yeah, it's very, very much based off this movie. But a great update of it. I don't think there needs to be a remake because I think that that episode of Tales from the Crypt did a perfect job of it. But it's another one for you could watch it free on YouTube for a great little relic of the 50s and a little piece of displaying the counterculture of that era. It's good and it's fun to watch Dick Miller, who was probably in his 20s but looked 57 in this movie, do his thing.
I enjoyed it immensely. It was a blast to watch because again, going into like, "All right, it's a bucket of blood. It's a '50s black and white. Okay," and I was again. He got me again twice with these old movies, just blown away by how well made they are.
And that continued on. We're now getting into the next one. We're getting into the Edgar Allan Poe cycle, where for a few years Roger Corman was tackling the works of Edgar Allan Poe, and it was some of the terms of the movies he directed, some of the ones he's more known for, because he was able to get some pretty big names into it and get some pretty big talent. And it was obvious too. He's able to get a little bit more of a budget too. He could work with less, but man, with the next movie, The Fall of the House of Usher, we got to see what he could do with a little bit more. Actually, I guess it's just called The House of Usher. It's based off the Edgar Allan Poe story, The Fall of the House of Usher.
So I think looking at everything, I think this period of Corman, the Corman Price Poe movies, I think are my favorite era of Corman because these movies they look incredible. I love a good gothic movie. You know, when everybody talks about kind of 60s gothic movies, of course Hammer is what we talk about. But I think these are massively overlooked for that time period and that genre and what they were doing. Um like this one, I love Mask of the Red Death. The movie's so weird. The Raven and The Pit and the Pendulum again just Corman and just giving Vincent Price a gothic castle and just letting him go. I think it's a lot of fun. It's some of my favorite Corman movies.
They You get to see with those movies his visual style and flair, and finally getting to shoot movies in color. And man, does he make the color pop! Does he does an amazing job with the sets. And of course, he gets to work with Vincent Price, one of the greats, who adds to anything he's in. You're right. Putting Vincent Price in a gothic mansion and letting him do his thing, you're gonna get something memorable and good. And House of Usher, you get something special here, in my opinion. So the House of Usher is based off the fall of the House of Usher. It's this young man is going to visit his fiance at this super creepy old estate where kind of everything around it's dead. Uh, and he shows up, and the butler of this old crumbling estate is kind of standoffish, and he kind of has to force his way in and be like, "Okay, I need to see my fiance." He gets to meet her brother, his fiance's brother, played by Vincent Price, who keeps on trying to get him to leave and get him to go away. And through pursuing the truth and being relentless and like, okay, what's going on? He finds out that this family, the Usher family, has a long and sordid history of doing terrible things, of being murderers and thieves and slave traders, and just despicable people. to the point where the brother is convinced, and Vincent Price's character is convinced that he and his sister are utterly cursed, and that the evil has permeated the house and the land around it and poisoned everything. And that according to Vincent Price's character, this family line cannot be allowed to continue. So he's very persistent in trying to get rid of this. Uh, Philip Winthrop's the character's name. Trying to get rid of him and go away because like we can't have children. You cannot have children with my sister. We cannot continue on this family name. It has to end with us. And well, Philip Winthrop just thinks this whole situation's ridiculous. He's like, people, you can't poison the land or this isn't a real thing. You're filling my fiance's head with nonsense. Or is he?
Yeah. So first of all, you have, like I said, you give this beautiful color, Technicolor set. I was looking up the answer to your question.
So was I. English author W. W. Jacobs wrote The Monkey's Paw in 1902.
And there was a movie made by Norman Lee as who directed it. I don't recognize. And when I think of The Monkey's Paw, I always think of the clip from the '70s, Tales from the Crypt, from Amicus. But no, so you have this beautiful Technicolor castle. You have Vincent Price with this pony boy dye job he's got going on, this blonde hair. And this other actor, I did not write his name down, but you have the screenplay by the great Richard Matheson. And yeah, I think this and The Mask of the Red Death are probably my two favorite of his Poe movies. Because The Mask of the Red Death just goes full on like LSD trip halfway through it. But I just love, you have this guy, he just wants to take his fiance out, and then you have Vincent Price, he's just sassily chewing the scenery at every second of screen time. And then you have this weird butler who's just like, "Hey man, take your shoes off. Don't talk so loud." Because they both have afflictions. Uh Vincent Price's character, he can't handle loud noises or bright light or the taste of food. Same with the woman. That's why she's sick, because she won't eat. And so is this weird plan of like, I can't allow you to marry my sister, so the only option is to bury her alive.
It it gets pretty unhinged, and man, speaking of hinge, Vincent Price's performance. Chewing the scenery is right, but in the best way. He
Absolutely.
goes for it. As Roderick Usher, he goes for it. It is exactly what this movie needed. A lunatic at the center of it, directing this whole circus. And man, it's great. Uh, but the thing that caught my eye the most in this movie is just the mansion and the colors. This movie is beautiful and it all pops. You get to see a few outside shots of this mansion, which is just crumbling, and these skeletal trees on the outside, and it looks amazing and gothic and something straight out of Edgar Allan Poe's story, and I love it. It's like, and that's it. You have the setting, this beautiful, crazy looking mansion, and you have four people. That's all that's in the movie.
Yeah.
It's a very small cast in one location. That's it. But that's all it needs. If you'll read the original story, it's very much in keeping with the story and the feeling of the story, and I think it's a fantastic adaptation.
Yeah, I haven't got around to watching the Flanagan show yet. I just got back into Netflix. But if you would like to see like an amazing kind of remake of this movie, do a little physical media report. Because I remember watching this in the theater and not at the time really realizing how much of an influence this movie was, but it's Del Toro's Crimson Peak. Like this is a beautiful take on something like this. Definitely not. It doesn't quite have the hand performance of Vincent Price. Uh, but you can definitely see a lot of Corman's influence on from his post stuff on this movie, which looks stunning as well, and just does an amazing job of kind of capturing that beautiful gothic uh, atmosphere. And again, this is another one I watched on Prime. IMDb says it's 79 minutes. The Amazon is 83, and it's literally 5 minutes. The movie doesn't start. There's 3 to 4 minutes of just black screen with this beautiful haunting score, and then the movie starts. I don't know what that's about, but it put me right in the mood for this movie. Again, like you said, the limited uh everything, he makes the absolute most of it, and just what he's able to do, again, the coloring, the costume, the music, all that enhances everything the actors are doing. Because yeah, Vincent Price he's Vincent Price. Like he's great. I'm sorry I didn't write down but the man who plays the fiance and his sister, they're both fantastic. And this poor put upon butler, they're all four are just phenomenal in this movie, and it's just a absolute beautiful piece of filmmaking.
The actor who played Philip Winthrop, his name is Mark Damon, and who played Madeline Usher was Myrna Fahey, who is just this stunning dark-haired beauty in this movie. Roger Corman was able to get these stunning women in this movie, and it's just this beautiful woman that's haunted by the things that have happened in her family, and it works. It's a great example of this era of filmmaking, and especially at a time when color movies were becoming the norm, and people are really going pretty wild with that and really making the colors pop. The 60s was a great era for these bright, vibrant movies. And this one really kicked off the decade great in that regard. Interestingly enough, a lot of Vincent Price movies of that era really did a lot with bright, vivid colors. Another one that comes to mind is The Abominable Dr. Fives, which
Mhm.
is a visually striking movie. This one, though, it's especially if you're an Edgar Allan Poe fan, watch all of the Roger Corman Edgar Allan Poe movies. I would say The Master of the Red Death is probably still my favorite, but this is a close second.
Yeah.
This is one I first watched. I was a teenager when I first watched it. Big Edgar Allan Poe fan, and yeah, I enjoyed it, and I have not revisited it in over 20 years, and I'm glad I watched it again. It was a great suggestion.
So we're gonna jump ahead several years now. Well, not we jumped ended up jumping more than we thought we would. There was a bit of a miscommunication with our next movie. So I'll kind of go into the movie, but do you want to kind of set up our oopsie? What we originally were
Uh,
going to talk about?
so for those joining us, I just got back from work a little while ago, right before we went on. I got to run to the bathroom real quick, and I'll be right back. Jason will entertain you in the interim. Dance for him, Jason.
Okay. What do you guys want to talk about? Let's look here. We'll look at the chat and see what's going on. Let's see. Yes, I highly recommend the menu. Um, I know that when that came out, there was all the talk was for the other kind of like boo eat the rich movie at the awards. Oh my gosh, it's Woody Harrelson on the boat, Triangle of Sadness. But I think the menu is a much better, especially a more fun movie. I see clips of it now on my TikTok, and every time I kind of stop and watch the same like 2 minute clip. But I enjoyed the heck out of that movie. So yeah, like I said, we are barely scratching the surface of Corman. One movie I kind of thought Nick was going to talk about We're not just spoilers. Oh, he's back already. So I've done it. Go me. They've
Tried to
been
make it as
thoroughly
quick as I
entertained,
could.
sir.
So we decided when we were doing this episode, we were each going to pick three Roger Corman movies, directed or produced. So I was looking through the filmography, and there was an early movie featuring Robert De Niro from 1970 called Bloody Mama, a crime movie. That is the movie I intended to pick. Bloody Mama was followed up by two sequels, Big Bad Mama and Big Bad Mama 2. I inadvertently told Jason one of my picks was Big Bad Mama. So we reviewed the one that did not have Robert De Niro in it and is actually a sort of sequel. I say sequel, it's kind of a loose sequel, has a similar character in it, but it's one of those you don't have to watch Bloody Mama and to really grasp what's going on in Big Bad Mama at all. And instead of Robert De Niro, we get William Shatner and what's that guy's name escaping me?
It's
We
it's
saw him at the
Nick's
horror convention.
it's Nick's favorite actor, horror actor, Tom Skerritt.
Tom Skerritt. Oh, said we have a story about him, but we can tell it after the review because we actually have a time we saw a Tom Skerritt story.
All right,
But
so this is one I definitely wanted to do because so Nick sends me his list. I'm like, okay, Big Bad Mama. Okay. So I find it. I'm like, it's on Prime. I'm like, okay, look at that. Okay, William Shatner, Tom Skerritt, Angie Dickinson. I know Angie Dickinson basically from Dress to Kill, and that's it. So I start this movie. Um, and this movie it just starts. It's about Angie Dickinson. Um, and she has two daughters. One who is they're both very, very frank and in their conversations about sex and whatnot. Even though one of them they keep trying to pose her as a young child, but she's the one who's naked the most, which is weird.
it's
Um,
weird.
and she wants to marry this local yokel kid, and Angie Dickinson won't allow it because their family's poor and they deserve better. Hey, they will not settle for a life they don't deserve, right, Maxine? Um, so they leave the altar, they run off with the oh my gosh, the actor who I can't remember his name, but he was great. And then it's just essentially them Bonnie and Clyding their way across like the Great Depression era South, running into wild characters such as Tom Skerritt, who's a bank robber, William Shatner playing this like Kentucky dandy, uh, with this amazing accent. Dick Miller is like a bootlegger FBI agent who's on their tail and is really just like a shoot first, ask questions later type guy. And his bumbling sidekick. And then there's just so much like sleazy awesomeness in this movie, and yeah, you're just like, what is happening? I remember watching this. Amber was in the room, but she wasn't watching this, and I just like so many out times it was like, why did Nick pick this movie?
Wow, I was not ready for this movie. I know in the late 60s, early 70s, they were pushing the envelope, but wow. This movie is wild. It is bonkers from beginning to end of car chases and shootouts and as much frivolous, unnecessary nudity as you can throw into a movie. There are Skinamax movies with less nudity than this movie. There's times where it's like so obvious. They're just like, oh no, we don't want the audience isn't paying attention. Flash a titty at them. It happens so much. This woman and her daughters cannot keep their clothes on at all. And you get to see a lot of A lot of them, a lot of Angie Dickinson. You also get to see more of Tom Skerritt and William Shatner than you ever thought you needed to. Wow. I mean,
Dude,
it's just they're getting naked again.
I hand to God, I did not have on my 2024 bingo card. You're gonna spend a Saturday watching a movie that has multiple naked William Shatner sex scenes in it. Like that, I was not prepared for how much of Captain's Kirk we see in this movie.
And it's just like they have some pretty like it's not like oh you see them briefly and then they're underneath the covers. They're like rubbing all over each other. It gets very sexually explicit. Uh, it is okay. Roger Corman was trying to make a super sleazy, very sexual movie with a lot of violence because it's just this woman and her two daughters sexing and shooting their way across the United States and just being robbers in the most reckless way. They are terrible robbers. They never try to hide their identity, and they go barreling into situations in the dumbest way possible. Then Angie Dickinson's character, the big bad mama of the title, just starts shooting her Tommy gun to get out of everything. That's their plan. Run into somewhere, make some remarks, shoot a bunch, and she'll just randomly start shooting, grab the money, and leave, and hope they can get away. It's it's a wild, almost it's like this crime spree gangster movie, but we keep on using the term sleazy. This is a super sleazy movie. A lot of car chases involving cars from the 1930s. I was watching it. They drove the crap out of every one of those cars. I don't know how many cars they had to wreck in this movie. It was a lot. I can't lie though, I was entertained. This movie's absolutely absurd beginning to end. I don't know how this movie isn't more well known. I am now going to seek out both Bloody Mama and Big Bad Mama 2 because I got to see these other two movies. Because this one went hard and hilarious and oh man, I was thinking it'd be more of kind of a prime depression era like bank robbing movie where you get but the twist is they're women. No, not really. It goes in some bizarre directions. And there's like a scene in a church where the girl's getting married and then the mom takes her out of there and the preacher yells, "That's goddamn blasphemy." And it's such a great line out of nowhere. It's just one-liners and absurd bullshit, and William Shatner doing his usual hammy acting only with Kentucky accent. It's a bunch of things you never knew you needed in a movie, but man, they are there on full display.
This movie, it's borderline a comedy because it feels like but it's weird, like hyper violent. But it's like not quite on like not the not quite on the level of like say something like Last House on the Left, which is just utterly like hard to watch mixed with like the goofiest slapstick. But like there's moments like yeah, just mowing people down. There is a scene for the end where it's just a bunch of people just Tommy gunning the shit out of somebody. But meanwhile, there's all this like banjo, hoot, and jug music. These women are like, and it is really weirdly like women empowering because all the men in this movie are idiots.
They,
And it's
they,
just
they are they are dumb as bricks, and they listen to their penis and do the absolute dumbest, idiotic thing possible at every turn.
these women just rule the school, and it's just like they use everything at their disposal to get they just want a better life. Um, there's a scene like they rob like an American Legion, which sets up a strip show with these girls. They steal all the money from that, and then you're like, oh, they're gonna run off. Like they check into a hotel, and they're like, bring up a sandwich. We like sandwiches. And then yeah, it's William Shatner. Like I couldn't get over how naked he is, and he's kind of doing that voice he does in National Lampoon's Loaded Weapon 1, where he plays the villain. He's just very southern and nasty. Uh, and then hey, if nothing else, we get a Tom Skerritt, William Shatner, pre Devil's Reign combo. They do Devil's Reign the next year, which is a fun movie we should talk about at some point. Or Ernest
Definitely.
Borgnine plays the Goat Man. But no, I as I was watching this movie, I was having fun, but I was just like, what a there's that meme of like you're watching that you get that parent like, what are you watching? Um, but I was doing it to myself through a lot of this movie, like just like, oh, hope my parents don't show up right now. How am I gonna explain how much of Angie Dickinson's on the screen? Because again, I only knew her from Dress to Kill, so I was like, oh, it's that older lady from the beginning of the movie. Why was that such a big deal? Oh, because I have seen all of Angie Dickinson now.
Yes.
Um, and it's
Who was
just
a quite a fetching woman. She was, I believe, in her early 40s at this time, and she's pretty stunning. And
absolutely,
she's got the swagger of being this frankly unhinged badass that will do anything she wants, anything she needs to do to get the life for her and her daughters, who are both dumb as bricks. Holy shit! Most of the characters in this movie are just dumb, so dumb, but it's great. Tom Skerritt, dumb. William Shatner's character, really dumb. Angie Dickinson's probably the smartest character, and she's not that bright either. So you're watching dumb people do a lot of sexual things and shoot a lot of guns and get in a lot of car crashes, and it's glorious.
yeah.
Man, this movie should have more of a following. It is so outrageous, beginning to end. There's just I can't really impress upon people how hilarious and it's like excessive the nudity is. Like there's that scene at the American Legion where they show like an entire striptease from a character who's not even in the movie hardly at all. But they just want to see this woman dance with her tassels on. So
Yeah,
Roger Corman's like, okay, we're gonna focus on that for the next 2 minutes.
yeah, it's the whole show, and it's just like where it's just like, oh, Tom Skerritt, like dumb, like backward falls into a three-way. Like there's so much weird sleazy
Oh,
sex in this movie. It's bizarre how like dirty this movie is
it's
for
so
its like concept.
it is like I didn't look up. This movie had to have been rated X when it came out. Had to have been because it is softcore porno levels of sex and nudity. It's outrageous. Watched it with my wife Bree, and we had a great time with it, just making fun of it and just being like, "Oh well, no." They're like, "Nah, they're not going to do that." Then that's exactly what they do. Yes, I am talking about Big Bad Mom. You knew exactly what I was talking about.
Yeah, and then so watched it. I was like, oh, there's a sequel. That's weird because of the way the movie ends. Kind of feels like there wouldn't be. But then when
And
you
there's a sequel.
messaged me 2 days ago and you're like, I gave you the wrong movie. It's supposed to be this movie, which is the first. I was like, there's no way there were three of these movies. Although I don't see uh sh- um Shirley Winters quite going to the extremes that Angie Dickinson does. At least I hope not.
I have a feeling Bloody Mom is probably a little more straight laced and a little less of a porno than Bloody Mom 2. Although it's like bit Big Bad Mama 2 was made 13 years later. So I'm really curious of what this same formula in the 80s is gonna look like. We'll have to give that a review at some point because I am directed by Jim Wynorski,
Oh baby.
the
Yes.
guy who did Chopping. Wow, okay. Yeah, we're in another movie we're going to be reviewing shortly. Wow. Okay. Yes, absolutely. Corman's involvement. He was a producer in this movie. He didn't direct it, but you can see his touch here. A lot of his influence, and again, it's like Angie Dickinson wasn't exactly like an unknown person. She dated Frank Sinatra. She'd been in a lot of films after that point, and somehow she's like, okay, let's get naked all of the time in this movie. It cracked me up. I wasn't ready for this movie when I watched it, and I'm glad I wasn't.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad we were both able to go into this. I was especially glad knowing that because I watched it before you. So when you're like, I'm getting ready to watch it now, I was like, oh boy. Don't ruin anything for him. Let it wash over him. No, yeah, I have plenty to say about Jim Wynorski here in a little bit, but we're definitely gonna have to watch. We may have to do an episode, a live talking about Jim, but I was blown away by how much sleazy fun this is. All
Speaking of
right.
sleazy fun, the sleaze continues. It's gonna keep on going.
Oh baby. So one, we talked about all these different movies, different genres that have Corman's cut. And one of them was when he was doing these movies that were quote unquote rip-offs, movies like Galaxy of Terror, the I know it by the other name, which will give away what I'm getting ready to talk about, but the Terror Within, uh,
Piranha.
Piranha, Humanoids from the Deep, which is our next movie from 1980. One Corbin signature, which is weird, is monster creatures having the hots for human babe.
Okay, I watching this movie that occurred to me because I'm like kind of seeing a theme here, Roger Corman, and it's kind of a weird theme at that.
Let's just say that there are certain animes that are blamed for a lot of weird things on the internet where 40 years ago Roger Corman was putting them in sci-fi horror movies.
And uh, you want to take the plot, or you want me to take it?
No, I
Plot,
can take it.
basically.
I'll take this one.
Got it.
So what would happen if creatures from the Black Lagoon, there were a bunch of them, and they wanted women? It's kind of the simplest way to break this movie down. So we have this weird fishing town, uh, and this group of fishermen that it turned racist immediately toward the one Native American character in this movie. Uncomfortably so. That might be more uncomfortable than all the monster assault that happens. Um, and they're wanting to open a new cannery in town to save the fishing business, but our native friend doesn't want to do it because it's gonna kill the area. Also, you get of sadly a movie I didn't realize he was in. He's great in it, but when you think about him, you sadly can't think about anything else. Twilight Zone. Vic Morrow, who's really good in this movie, as kind of the town bully, town a hole, and it's you deal with these monsters coming out. It's essentially horny Jaws. I guess it's the best way to break it down. In its most simple terms. Um, I will say this movie, when it goes for it, it goes for it. Not just in the weird, like, uh, monster stuff, but like we're 6 minutes in and there's a dead kid. Um, there are a ton of dead dogs, so be wary of that. Um, there's there's so much. This is definitely in that same vein of like we were talking about, like Piranha or um movies kind of that ilk where it's just this is all like I said, it's almost like a Jaws ripoff without being a Jaws ripoff, and just weird, horny monsters.
Yes. This feels like that harkens back to the beach monsters of the 50s and 60s of these monsters coming from a lake or from the sea, um, which there were a lot of, and they were all very low rent back in the 50s and 60s. Only, what if we can make that only way gorier and way hornier and show a lot more nudity? Because it's another case where they throw in a lot of nudity seemingly out of nowhere. So the reason we have these fish monster people is apparently this fish company is working on a way to make fish bigger and spawn more and all that, and there's some inadvertent effect on this prehistoric species of fish. I think it's alluded to be maybe a coelacanth, and advanced they have an evolutionary leap forward, and all of a sudden they are monster fishmen, and they're after women and ripping their way across this small town. And of course, you know, these people run into one, and nobody believes them until more dead bodies start showing up. And it goes from like not showing them to showing them a lot in a very short period of time.
And they look
Uh,
great.
they do. That's what surprised me watching this again, because I bought this movie for you for your 17th birthday way back in the year 2002. I know I'm dating us, but it was used. I remember I bought it at Hastings, and I watched it before I gave it to you. And I was watching, and it's like, oh man, I really enjoyed it. Watching it again, man, they did a good job with those costumes. Those things look gross and slimy and pretty awesome. They have exposed brains, and they look menacing. Uh, Come to find out, I was doing some reading. They only had 3 costumes. Only actually one of them was like full blown and complete, because the other two, apparently, if you film them head on, they didn't look great. I must say they did a great job of hiding it, because all the scenes with them, and it makes it look like there's large numbers of them. Because the movie, towards the end of the movie, there is a big like town fair, and creatures come in force and start tearing through it, and people are ripped apart, and it's wild. And it starts getting pretty funny when the people start fighting back and forth. One scene in particular, with a lot of the bunch of people grab a board, just boards and start going like hacksaw Jim Duggan on these creatures, and it's great.
Yeah, that blows my
It's
mind because yeah, that scene at the fair is just like they're everywhere.
they're like popping up from under the. It's like that's how the scene starts. It's like they pop up from under a dock, and a hand comes through, and they start like tearing down the dock, and the heroes of the movie, are trying to like throw gas in the water to burn them out and fight back, and it gets brutal. All the while, you have this like disc jockey narrating the whole attack, who, instead of running, he's sitting there hanging out with like the local beauty queen and narrating these monsters ripping people apart in front of him. No sense of it. I guess the show must go on. What are you gonna do?
Yeah,
It's in another movie. It's 80 minutes long. It's a tight 80 minutes. It is a monster movie, and it is sleazy as hell.
a,
Slimy, sleazy, entertaining.
a lot of fun. I mean, there's a scene where the the bad guys, the town ruffians, decide that we need the Native American character's got to go, and unfortunately, he has built his house, his cabin in the woods on top of TNT Mountain because they blow the shit out of this cabin. It's amazing. There's a scene on the beach when we first see what the monsters are really after, which is like it was just like, hey, did you not think that the Shape of Water went far enough, buddy? Let me tell you. Also, there's this weird scene where like the regular guy is like seducing this girl who's way out of his league with like a ventriloquist dummy.
That part is I I completely forgot about this scene. They're out camping on the beach, and he's seducing this beautiful woman. He's managing to get her naked. using the power of ventriloquism, which you know this is a fantasy movie because that has literally never happened ever. He makes jokes about the ventriloquist dummy, and man, it works. Harms this girl's panties off until slimy sea monsters come and ruin the fun.
And then we gotta talk about maybe try to do it spoiler free. I don't know. I mean, it is a 44-year-old movie. That ending. Oh boy.
Ooh, it it's I remember that ending because and people, it's a sleazy monster movie called Humanoids of the Deep. If you don't want to hear the ending ruined, turn away now. But go
it
watch the
was
movie anyway.
it was kind of big thing in the 80s because you think it kind of the same thing happens in V. Uh, we get that dream sequence in The Fly with Gina Davis. Like, what a terrifying, Child's Play 5. Like, there's just what a terrifying concept. And man, this movie goes out like ends with a bang.
Yeah, well, one of the women who had they found a woman at kind of the den of these monsters, and she had been taken advantage of, and they get her back, and it shows at the very end of the movie, and she's in labor, and then her stomach, something starts ripping out of her stomach. Surprise! It's one of the sea monsters, and that she apparently been impregnated by, and it's gory, and that's the last shot of the movie is the face of that sea monster human hybrid baby. Bravo for going for it.
This
It's
is kind of the
absurd.
same.
It's pretty offensive, and it's very fitting, very very in tune with the rest of this movie.
Again, Corman kind of like has his weird, like we're on this weird king because this same scene kind of happens in Carnosaur as well.
Uh, that's not the only movie this happens in. It happens also in The Terror Within, which is
Yeah,
kind of another one of those movies with creatures being after human women. Or Corman has some weird things that show up in his movies, I will say. Some tropes he reuses again and again.
yeah.
Women getting impregnated by horrible monsters. That's it. And yeah, I said just know you watch it. That's the kind of trashy movie you're getting into. If you go look up basically any of the posters for this movie, they are all like slimy monsters and scantily clad women. Like every poster and cover for this movie. Oh, I did want to throw a random fact at you about this movie. Do you remember when Corman remade a bunch of his movies in the 90s?
Yeah, they did them all for was it Showtime or Cinemax? Because they're
I
hard to
can't
find
remember.
now, but
Yeah, and this is one of the ones he redid. I've heard almost, I think universally they're all worse, even with updated technology. But I'm gonna have to give some of those a watch. I'm curious, but for sleazy, gory 80s hot monster movie fun, here you go. It's kind of gross and offensive, but it was fun revisiting this movie after all of this time. And it just brought back memories of that summer camp, giving you this movie. I remember I gave you this movie and The Forsaken, which is a early 2000s vampire movie, which is so thoroughly stuck in that era. We'll have to talk about it at some point.
I will have to because
But
I haven't seen it since you bought it for me and we watched it one time.
yeah, we did. And we're like, oh, okay. Back in 2002, it's like DVDs cost more money. Um, But it's like, and that's why it's like this movie has it's the personal connection between us because you know, we watched this movie. I bought it for you, and it brought back a lot of good memories. More of that time than just how
Yeah.
ridiculous this movie is. I did
Yeah,
enjoy the movie though.
this is definitely like if you're a mutant, you know what that means. Driving mutant. Like this is like when you think Joe Bob Briggs, this is the movies you think of. Like this is and it's gonna be on a double bill with something insane like the Terror Within, which is the Terror Within is also known as Inseminoid, or is it the one of them is also called
No, that's the
that Galaxy?
the terror. Inseminoid was also known as Horror Planet.
Horror Planet, that was the
Um,
one.
it was another one of those countless Alien ripoffs, but we need to review the Terror Within, probably 1 and 2 at some point. It is one of my favorite Alien ripoffs. I think another one. Corman produced it, didn't direct, but his fingerprints are all over it. Confined setting, crazy monster, a lot of tension.
This is
With this
yeah,
one, you you get to see a lot more of the scenery of this, coastal town in this movie, and it's well shot. They did a lot with the creatures. It was fun revisiting it.
absolutely. So we talked about it, well, again, just now, but before we jump into our last movie, I do want to talk about the maker of this last movie because he said he directed Big Bad Mama 2, and he's a name that when I saw, I picked. So at the time, I didn't realize exactly how much assault was in Humanoids from the Deep. Uh, I wanted to do because Corman, as it gets into the 80s, Conan the Barbarian is huge. Much like Mad Max, which you talked about a few months ago, Conan birthed its own like genre of countless films and knockoffs. And so Corman was all in because he was like, I can build the same sandcastle, use it for 800 movies. And I don't know how many Swords and Sandals movies he did, including uh, the Deathstalker series. And I picked Deathstalker because one, they are the quintessential look at that cover because the movie's never gonna live up to it. But I picked Deathstalker 2 because at the time I was like, Deathstalker 2 is more fun. It's a little more tongue in cheek and a lot less like assaulty.
Creepy.
Yeah. I thank goodness I did because I can't imagine having to do Humanoids from the Deep and then the first Deathstalker back to back. Uh, but Deathstalker 2 is directed by Jim Wynorski. Again, we talked about for a while he was like kind of the king of horror sequels because he has the Return of Swamp Thing, 976 Evil 2.
Which is better than 976 Evil, by the way.
Yeah, it. He was basically would take these like overly serious, okay movies and do the sequels, but make them way more fun. And then of course went on to his illustrious career of making softcore movie parodies, much like Playmate of the Apes, the Bear Winch Project, and my favorite title, The Witches of Breastwick. Um, there's a great documentary about him called Papatopoulos. I highly recommend it. I watched it years ago on Netflix. I don't think it's still there. Um, and then of course his holy grail being Chopping Mall, uh, which I don't think was Corman produced. Maybe
I don't
uncredited,
believe it was.
but it does have all of Corman. Like Dick Miller's in it. Um, the actor Paul, because he and the woman are essentially playing the same characters from Eating Raoul. Um, that's a fun movie we need to talk about at some point. But right now, let's talk about Deathstalker 2. So with that, I will let you break this one down.
So I own all 4 of the Deathstalker movies on VHS. I remember the Deathstalker movies seeing the covers growing up because look up the art for the Deathstalker movies. The art is amazing fantasy art. Movies don't live up to it because they're low budget, low rent, borderline porno, some of them. The only one I had actually seen was Deathstalker 4 Match of the Titans, which is utterly absurd. It is a super violent boob fest, which even manages to outdo Big Bad Mama in just excessive nudity. But interspersed with some rather shocking violence at times, it's something else. So I was going into Deathstalker 2 not knowing what to expect. Now, if you're wondering why we're doing 2, it's because you don't have to watch these movies in any kind of order. It's a dude named Deathstalker going around rescuing the damsels and fighting dudes and fighting monsters and being in poorly lit rooms fighting people. It's a sword and sorcery movie, and a low rent one at that. However, I wasn't aware that Deathstalker 2 was basically a parody movie. It's a straight up comedy. I was expecting kind of a B sword and sorcery movie, and it is that, but it is a completely self-aware B parody sword and sorcery movie. Sure enough, you got this guy named his name in the movie is the Deathstalker. They sometimes call him Stalker, creepy, and he's a thief and an adventurer, and teams up with this princess to try to restore her to her rightful place in the kingdom. And there's an evil royal guy, Jarek. I don't know what exactly his position is, who's replaced her with a duplicate. And he has some female warrior that works for him and a bunch of goons, including some human pig hybrids. And I'm probably overstating the plot here. A stalker fight people. That's the movie. He goes around sprouting one-liners, running into beautiful women, including this like tribe of Amazons, and making his way back to the final confrontation and the epic sword fight with the big bad guy known as Jarek. But I was just caught off by just it's just the goofy dialogue. They're not like talking like it's medieval times. Like I never thought I'd hear the term bucko this much in a medieval sword and sorcery movie. And it's like it's like winking at the camera. It's completely making fun of the genre. They didn't try to make some serious sword movie. They filmed this. Apparently, they filmed it in Argentina. This was the last of the sword and sorcery movies that Roger Corman produced. It kind of just looks like they wanted to have fun with it. Because as far as I know, Deathstalker 3, they kind of went back to the same formula. But 2, it's a straight up comedy. It's just lampooning the genre. And it works for it. It absolutely works. Bizarrely enough.
First of all, Jarek is the king of sass. There's one sassy sword. And he's such a bitch in that movie. And then you have Deathstalker, who's essentially Ryan Reynolds playing Han Solo. Like he's just got this smirk on his face, and he might as well be chewing gum through the whole movie. Like he is totally aware what movie he's in, and he's fine with it. And then yeah, like you have he's just like, hey yeah, babe, and like come on, and it's just one like weird nude thing after another, and then you run afoul of this. So the Jarek has cloned the princess. He made an evil clone. He made evil S's to like put him in power because she's a witch. But the real her is she's a ditzy blonde. The movie's all over the place, but it absolutely knows what it's doing. It knows that it's a movie called Deathstalker 2, and essentially it's just like, hey, you like sword and sandals movies? How about some boobies? You, me, 80 minutes. Let's go. And that's exactly what it gives you. Let's have some fun.
Yes, and it is. It's fun. At the beginning of the movie, it's like this woman who's terrible at acting. It's like looks at the screen. It's like I'm gonna find her, and looks at the screen, and Deathstalker too. I was like that. They really did that. That kind of let me know. It's like okay, I think I'm getting a little bit of a clue of what I'm in for. Just lines like he tells this woman something about walk east until your hat floats. Throws in some obscure quotes in there. I don't even know what that means. You get a wrestling scene. There is a pro wrestling scene starring a real woman pro wrestler, Matilda the Hun, aka Queen Kong, who was part of the Glow, the Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling promotion back in the 80s. And it's just like full blown, middle of the movie. You get a pro wrestling match. Why? Because we can, and it's great. Um, This guy who plays Deathstalker, it is a different actor than the guy who played in the original Deathstalker, but he is. I can't lie, I love him in this movie. He looks like a hero, and he is having so much fun with it. It's so ridiculous, and his line delivery, everything is so ridiculous, but it works. The comparison to Ryan Reynolds in kind of terms of how his attitude and swagger throughout the movie is very accurate.
It I just loved it. Like there's so much goofy. Right before there's a big barbarian sword fight, like spaghetti western music starts playing. Like you think you're like, is it did Ennio Morricone do the score for this thing? And then the movie ends. The movie ends like a sitcom. Like it's insane. Like he's just a turn to like.
What you gonna do? Yeah.
You have this
Yeah.
scene where he's like, he gets captured by this female tribe, and they hate men because men are useless. And so, in order to not get murdered, he has to strip down to his underwear and wrestle this giant woman. Um, in which he wins, and so immediately his prize is he has to bed the queen of the Amazons, which he's all for doing, and then until he finds out that they're getting married, and he cuts bait and runs. Um, there's a scene when he goes to rescue the princess, and essentially is being seduced by the evil princess because she has to have blood to survive, so she sexes men on this bed that is straight out of like the 1990s version of The Haunting, with all these weird faces on it, and then like puts their faces on the bed, and so it's like you watch like this love scene happen almost on this bed with all these wood carved faces staring at you. It's nuts. It's absolutely nuts. But is a blast is the best way to describe this.
I gotta mention a few more of the quotes here. At one point, Deathstalker says, not the hair, anything but the hair," because of course his fabulous '80s hair looks amazing, amazing. Uh, the princess telling him, "Stalker, is that your sword, or are you just happy to see me?" This is the kind of dialogue you get. It was like it's like she's Princess Evie. I'm Evie. I'm Deathstalker. Deathstalker, is that your first name or your last name? All these just
Yeah.
pretty legitimate questions, but they're so great in this movie. There's so many lines and winks. It's another one kind of like Big Bad Mama that I didn't know what I was in for, but I was very pleasantly surprised. Um, Sword and sorcery genre, the fantasy genre in general, is ripe for the lampooning, and it's not done enough. And I was very pleasantly surprised to see them doing it and doing it pretty well on a shoestring budget. One thing about this movie really surprised me, though, some of the sword fighting scenes were actually pretty decent.
Yeah.
The guy who plays Deathstalker, who I would like to see in more things now, uh, they have some training, and there's the fight between him and Jarek at the end. It's not on the level of Lord of the Rings or anything or The Last Samurai, but it's actually pretty decent. They put some effort into the choreography and actually learned a little bit about sword fighting. Given how goofy the movie is, that impressed me.
And
And it's
again, the sets, like I'm sure that they used this castle. It was probably used for Deathstalker. It was probably used for all the David Carradine Sword and Sandals movies that Corman produced before this. Uh, but it looks great. It films great. Like you said, you have this outside of the castle like courtyard scene. It looks fantastic.
I, yeah, I need to go back and complete the entire all four of the Deathstalker movies. But I don't know if any of them will live up remotely to this one. It's a movie I recommend checking it out. I highly recommend it. It's a lot of fun. It's ridiculous. It's got a lot of funny lines in it. This one, I was so glad we did this one. It was the most fun out of all the movies we chose, and it's absurd. And I said, especially as kind of bracing, it's like after watching Deathstalker 4, which is a softcore porno interspersed with violence, I it was refreshing to see Deathstalker 2, which is actually surprisingly restrained with the nudity compared
Yeah,
to some of other Corman's movies. It's not that it's completely absent, it's not wildly excessive either.
yeah. I've again, again for a man who made the movie The Bear Witch Project, it does feel very restrained for a Norsky movie as well. But yeah, it just again for because I'm a sucker for these movies, man. I like uh The Barbarians, which is a wild, insane '80s movie. Uh, again, the ones with there's that one with David Carradine where he has like a super like giant double sword. Of course, the big
Or
one is Thor. Is it
That's where
Sorcerer?
there was one called The Sorcerer, yes. I was thinking of the Ator series with Miles O'Keefe, Ator the Fighting Eagle,
Mm-hmm.
Iron Warrior. There's another one from around the same time called Hawk the Slayer. Uh, there's a movie that's actually somewhat similar to this, a tongue-in-cheek sword and sorcery movie called Wizards of the Demon Sword. I also recommend
I just
those
love
movies.
it.
Most they're B movies, but man, they're entertaining.
There's
And this is high on the list.
I think Sword and Sorcerer is the one I think is the one that Albert Pune did. Um, there's there's I think it's the Barbarians. Is it the Barbarians that has Richard Lynch in it as the villain, and he dies
I
because
think so.
he forgot he didn't have a trigger finger. Spoilers for the movie The Barbarians, where he goes to shoot
The
a crossbow
Barbarian
and
Brothers.
forgot he doesn't have a trigger finger. But no, this is absolute blast. Like again, going into this, we were just kind of picking at random. Because again, so many 400 credits, man, and so it was just kind of like, all right, we'll do one from here. We'll do one from here. I was like, okay, we did a lot of Sword and Sandals. Let's pick one of those. Pick a Poe movie, and I thoroughly enjoyed everything we watched. It made me excited to at some point to dive back into the world of Corman, man. Because again, a 70-year career, 400 credits to his name, and just kind of had his fingers in like every genre that you can think of, and it's pretty incredible career.
This is one I remember we talked about doing, didn't get around to it. Frankenstein Unbound, which I believe was the last movie he directed, and from 1990, with Raul Julia and was it Tim Curry that's in it?
It's John Hurt.
John Hurt, Raul Julia. Yeah, it's yeah, pretty interesting take on Frankenstein. And there's a lot of interesting movies. We're definitely coming back to Roger Corman because I want to do Frankenstein Unbound. I want to do The Terror Within. More Poe movies. There's a deep well to draw from, and I look forward to it because I enjoyed all six of these movies we watched. They were
Absolutely.
all enjoyable in different ways, but Corman knows how to shoot a movie. He knows how to get some good performances out of people. It's it was a lot of fun, and I say that Corman knows how to make a fun movie, and I'm glad we did this. He will be sorely missed. The man had a great run. He seemed like a great guy, and he left quite an impact on the film industry. And he he definitely has played a big role in our love of film throughout the time we've known each other and the movies we've watched.
Yeah, absolutely. And so yeah, this was fun. Like I said, we were late uh to being able to kind of memorialize the guy, but if nothing else, we were able to kind of just enjoy a small sliver of this man's career and how much it means to again the stuff we watched growing up, the stuff we still watch, the stuff we still enjoy, and it was an absolute blast. I happily come back to Corman Land again. But next week next week. I apologize. Next month. You know, it's hot here in Oklahoma. The dog days of summer, if you will. Um, yeah, thank you for that. Um, but we had a question, and again, this is how this works. A little bit of engagement. Uh, Somebody commented on one of our live streams replays that's up on YouTube and said, "Hey, you guys should do a blank from hell episode." And so, looking at the schedule, that's what we're doing. Next month, we are doing Animals from Hell, and we're gonna
Animals
do.
from Hell.
That's right. Uh, I made a dad joke. You actually brought a prop to the video, so well done. Um, we're doing Animals from Hell. It's gonna be our top 10 list of crazy killer animals. Excluding the first Jaws because we can all kind of agree that Jaws would be on that list. So, in order to make it a little more fun, make it a little more surprising where we go with our evil animals, next month we will be talking about our top 10 animals. Hell. So, I'm excited to do that. I'm excited to watch some animal attack movies.
Excellent. I've been a big fan of the genre for a while. I remember buying Grizzly on DVD back when I was in high school, and along with the movie Frogs, which was something. A lot of great movies in that genre. We got to see a lot in the 70s and 80s where apparently everyone was afraid your dog, the cow, reptiles, frogs, whatever, were going to brutally kill you.
I
You wouldn't do
can
that, would you, buddy?
I can safely say that I've done. If you missed our Jeff Daniels live where we kind of talked about Jeff Daniels, I've done my spider movie this year, so there will be no spider movies on Jason's list. Uh, but if there was, I would tie it back to this list, and we could talk about Kingdom of the Spiders and just
Oh,
watch
yeah.
like William Shatner grabbing tarantulas. But
Does he
no, it's
get
gonna be.
naked in that movie?
I don't remember. I don't think so. I feel like this was it. Hopefully, I didn't watch every episode of TJ Hooker, but I don't think he drops trow in it. Um, man, I think there was more. God, just the image of naked William Shatner in my head right now, and I'm not okay with it.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's all you can think about.
yeah, there was. It's a real like Ned Flanders, nothing at all situation. Uh, I think he was thrusted more in that movie than he was in Star Trek. But anyway, if you want more fun like this all the time, again, join us on Twitch every month. We do these live hangouts. We cover insane topics, fun topics, all kinds of things. We're talking all movies all the time. Uh, so yeah, next month we're doing Animals from Hell. If that's not enough, you want more. You should go check out our YouTube page at the Movie-Club Emporium, where each week, every Sunday, new reviews drop. This week is going to be my review on I Saw the TV Glow, the new kind of indie darling that's going on, just got released digitally. Super excited to talk about that. Next month, not July, but August is going to be our summer block party, and it's an Italian vacation. So this will be the first kind of tease for that. Uh, that's going to be a lot of fun. We've also got all kinds of wild movies coming up that we'll be talking about, and yeah, it's a good time. So make sure you join us there and here for all of your fun movie chats. That's what this is. It's just friends talking about movies, and it relieves our wives for a couple hours every month of not having to listen to us go on and on about movies for just a little bit.
We've been talking about movies, Jason and I, for almost 30 years, and we'll be talking about it for a long time to come. And we have a lot of fun doing this and a lot of experience to draw back on as shared experiences with our mutual love of movies. But as I had a great time with this one this month, watching these, revisiting these, and just a reminder of fun
what it's like when you have a filmmaker who just wants to make some really fun stuff. You will- we we'll miss you, Roger Corman. You're one
Absolutely.
of a kind.
So with that, we will say join us next month for killer animals and some killer fun. Stay away from sewers because there's monsters in there. And I was gonna have some stupid quip, but I lost it. So without